A word to the wise. This episode contains spoilers for Mega Man Legends and Mega Man Legends 2. Listener discretion is advised. On this week's episode of Electronic Fun, I'm joined by TaiCheesy to dive deep into Capcom's cult classic third-person shooter, Mega Man Legends, and the lost art of the mid-budget game. So please, join me. Let's have some fun. What's been going on with you recently, Tyler?
Job searching finally ending. Have something.
Ooh, exciting.
I know. Finally, I can expand and explode.
That's what we all want you to do is blow up in a fiery explosion.
Can't wait for everybody to see. Whoa, Tyler, huge dude, just like Dragon Ball.
We're all at your funeral. That's what we say to you. Oh, huge fireball, dude, looked awesome. It's like Dragon Ball.
So sick.
Awesome. Speaking of the pop culture of the 1990s, welcome back to Electronic Fun.
Yeehaw.
We've got Tyler here. Tyler Cheesy, man.
Mr. Cheese, if you please.
Anyway, this week we're talking about this little tiny game called Mega Man Legends.
Just a little game.
Which was made by Capcom in the year of our Lord 1997. And I have a question about this later, but this might be the most 1997 game ever.
Yeah, for sure.
In that it's in a very weird place as an early 3D game. But we'll get into that. Let's start off with the first question that I ask of all my guests. Who are you? How would you describe yourself?
Well, my name is Tyler Carson, and depending on when you asked, I would say voice actor first, or QA tester, or producer. But you know what? Like most people around us nowadays, we're kind of all jack of all trades. You know what I mean?
This is true.
But voice acting is what I pull the most joy out of the times that I
passion.
can. Yeah, but sometimes you got to put money on the table. So producing for ads and stuff like that, totally fine. I'm very organized. Just love it. This is my side gig. Love it.
Yeah, it's you've had a very long and illustrious career in many different fields.
Up and down, all around.
Where it stops, nobody knows. Before we get into actually talking about Mega Man Legends, let's talk about how your sort of relationship with games began. When did you start playing video games?
Oh boy. Somebody else asked me this question not too long ago, and I had to think about it because I don't know if I had a Nintendo 64 or a Game Boy first, Game Boy Color. But my biggest memories are of Pokemon Blue, getting a little non-see-through purple Game Boy Color, having a blast, finding out early on that there are batteries in the cartridges and they can die, and you can no longer save your games.
Unless you have to solder them. I did try to I tried to learn how to solder so I could resolder on a battery for a Pokemon Emerald. It was a very long and arduous process, but I somehow did it. It's not soldering is hard.
It is hard. That's why I haven't even tried to do it now at my own age. But yeah, started with that, and probably in 64 a little after, not too far off. And with that came a combination of Super Mario 64, Pokemon Stadium, and Mega Man 64 at some point.
Interesting. My next question after this is, well, my next question is, what is Mega Man Legends? But I think it's interesting that you got your start on the Nintendo 64 version, generally considered to be the far worse version of the game.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons, but
Th-
I could talk about them later. But I love all the versions for all of their different quirks, and I might still prefer the 64 version for
Ooh,
yeah.
we're
But
getting
yeah, I
spicy
started
here.
on that, and that came out in 2000, I believe. Um,
2001 was when the N64 version came out, which was like 3 or 4 years after the PS1 version.
mhm.
And everyone was like, "This is terrible."
It's a crunchy mess.
I remember I doing a lot of research for this. I read reviews, and everyone was like, "Oh, this game was good." And very tellingly, by 2001, this game was very out of step with where games were going.
Mhm.
It's a very interesting little time capsule that we're talking about. But I'm trying to think of any other PS1 games that got ported to N64. The only one that I can think of that was done well is Resident Evil 2.
Mhm.
They somehow got all of Resident Evil 2 into an N64 cartridge, and
A huge feat.
it plays really well. The only downside is that the audio is a little compressed, and they had to reuse some cutscenes to save space. But
Oh
it's a
boy.
miracle that that game exists.
It's
It's
true.
it's kind of amazing.
The audio is always the first thing to go when you're going to a cartridge.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, going back to that question I was going to ask, what is this game? What is Mega Man Legends? Explain it to us. Maybe a little bit of the plot as well. You can say whatever spoilers you want. It doesn't matter.
Mega Man Legends starts off several thousand years past the usual chronological order of things, whether it be classic or Mega Man X or Mega Man Zero, all that jazz. You fly around in a little flying machine with your classic buds, also Roll, and their grandfather, Barrel Casket. And that's it. That's the whole thing is just go find some gems, buddy.
Yeah, it's
Keep
it's a it's a very simple story. We'll briefly mention it later. I have a question about it, but
Mhm.
it's basically Mega Man meets Tomb Raider meets The Legend of Zelda. Essentially, there's dungeon crawling, and you basically just get gems, and you run into these kooky characters. There's One Piece pirates. The same year One
Yeah.
Piece came out.
Amazing. The timing could not have been better for
I,
that.
I I did genuinely look up like were they influenced at all for One Piece with the idea of the bonds, but no,
Mhm.
it came out around just serendipity, I guess.
We're like, "Yeah, we got pirates on lock, don't worry." But
Oh,
yeah,
we're gonna.
it's just a you don't really need to get a lot and need any past context for Mega Man to get into it. Like I knew of some things in the past before I played it as a kid, but it didn't stop me from wanting to dive into it, rent it at Blockbuster one time, and I only needed it to rent it once to be like, "Mom, I need this. I need this right
But
now."
so you had never played any of the Mega Man's classics or the X series at all. This was your first introduction.
Oh, no, no, no. I had done a little bit of classic, but mostly before Legends, I loved X. I played X at a friend's place, when my I had an aunt and uncle who lived in Atlanta at the time. We drove, all the way from Texas to visit one time, I think, and they had a next door neighbor who was a kid about my age, who had a Super Nintendo. I never had a Super Nintendo, and we had Super Mario World and Mega Man X. And I was one of those annoying kids back in the day. Like, if you had a game that I liked, I would show up at your house every day. Like, "Hey, could I play a little bit more? Is that cool? You want to hang out?" Drinking Capri Suns. But yeah, despite X being super, super solid mechanically and also having kind of minimal story, but still tells a lot with little going on, Legends got me. Is the hook.
Yeah, it certainly it is. I would say I have another question about this later.
Mhm.
It is the series of because there's so like a million different Mega Man spin-offs. Uh, it is the one that would say has the strongest cult following.
Mhm.
I'm a classic guy, so and I've played like only the first X game. But I've always been interested in the Mega Man games, and this one has always stood out as basically the weird one that isn't like a 2D side scroller or RPG game, like the some of the Game Boy ones, like Battle
Mhm.
Network and shit like that. It is certainly the most unique, I would say.
And it's so
So
hard to find and play as easily as all the other ones too, despite it
yeah,
having the seemingly larger, more vocal, cult following. I would say maybe
yeah.
Battle Network is on par as well,
I,
but,
I would say probably, most people know the classic or the X series. Below that you got the people who know Battle Network.
mhm.
Uh, and then you have like Legends, who are like the super small group, but they're very vocal about how much they love this game. And then there's like Zeros and your Star Commands.
Yeah.
Remember
I
Mega
mean,
Man Star Command?
just a little bit. There's only one friend that I talk to about that stuff. Everybody else's opinions on it are invalid, at least for me.
It's very interesting. So from a strictly gameplay standpoint, I compared this game to Tomb Raider and The Legend of Zelda. Even though
Mhm.
this game came out a year before Ocarina of Time, so this was, like I
Yeah.
said, in that sort of 3D Badland in between, like the launch of the PlayStation and I would say probably the later '90s, like 1998 is usually when people really got a hold of 3D was '98. Uh,
Indeed. It was surprising that it even did well and got a port, at least in my eyes, because it was also only the second 3D game for Capcom. Maybe entirety. I know the second Mega Man because the first 3D Mega Man was the Mega Man Kart Racer game. I
mm,
can't remember what it was called. But yeah,
yeah, I
they
mean,
were very new on a lot of things at this. So they took a
yeah,
big swing.
and Capcom had released Resident Evil, the Resident Evils beforehand. So they were
Mhm.
at least somewhat used to 3D gameplay, but for Resident Evil, that's a fixed camera angle, pre-rendered backgrounds. This, it's like
Yeah.
full 3D, rotatable camera, really janky controls.
That's still tanky.
Oh yeah, that's my immediate next question, is to talk about the actual gameplay. There's basically two sorts of different modes that this game has. There's the overworld, where you go around and talk to people, and buy stuff and do sorts of quest modes. There's boss fights above. Basically, that's where you advance the story, is above ground. And then
Mhm.
there's like basically dungeon crawling sections where you go into these uh, Windows 95 maze screensavers, uh, and fight all of these enemies. Uh,
Mhm.
so I guess the question is, what are your sort of thoughts on that minute to minute gameplay?
I man, I fucking love it. I'm a dirty little bastard, and I love controlling tanks, and just meaty things as a whole.
Mhm.
Um, because games, in my eyes, designed around that either are complete shit and you know immediately, or there's enough there for you to keep going, and you in the same realm as like a Dark Souls or something, you kind of beat your head against the wall for a while until you get it. And I mean, as a kid, when I can't ask for another game every so often, so frequently, or buy it myself, um, you just have to keep going. And
You were lashed to the albatross of Mega Man Legends.
exactly. But I don't remember having that much of a problem playing it when I was doing it. But I do remember not reading the tutorial stuff very like being that in depth with all that kind of stuff.
No
You
kid ever does. No kid reads the
Yeah,
tutorials.
exactly. But I'm the person that like at the very start will mash all the buttons and find out all the things I can do before moving on. And I still kind of do that now. Like I'll go into the options and change all those things, learn what the controls are before I even like boot up anything. I got to know what I'm into before I or getting into before I jump in.
Yeah.
Uh, and in Legends, they start with pretty basic stuff like, "Hey, here's the Buster. You can jump. You can turn the camera. Use this to open doors. Yada yada." But as far as I'm aware, they don't tell you at any point that you can do quick turns or that you can do dodge rolls to the left and right. You can swap the camera. You can do 180 turns or even 90-degree turns. Like, yeah, there was a lot of stuff that you find out just slowly by playing the game, and it once you unlocked that and started facing some more Reaver bots and other robots that are like attacking more often than just like every 3 seconds or something, it got a little sweaty.
Yeah, it's very interesting that they have all of this stuff because even, especially on the N64 version, the control mapping is really weird. Like you have
Mm,
the buttons you have to push to do certain moves are very strange. Because
yeah.
the N64 I don't think has as many buttons as the PlayStation 1, and it has like I want to say it has like weird. The N64 has like the A and B buttons and the C buttons, which are weird. Nobody ever figured out how to really map those properly.
Yeah.
Uh,
They're
Especially
like
when you get like
D-pad 2? I don't know about that,
it's like,
but
what is
okay.
this? Um, but also at the same time, a lot of the enemy encounters can mostly be beaten by circle strafing them. Just
Mhm.
walking around in a circle and shooting them. It's not exactly the most rigorous combat scenario. Uh,
Exactly. That it's weird, the easiest things end up being the bosses because they give you a lot of room to work around.
yeah,
Whereas when you're in the regular Windows 95 maze screensavers, those corridors are tight, and sometimes they'll
yes.
just intentionally stick a couple basic enemies in a tunnel, but their bombs are huge that they shoot out. So you're like, "Well, I guess I'll just sit here and wait or
And
die."
and that's really the main attack that a lot of the even the bosses have is they'll just like drop bombs or mines. So really the challenge is more trying to navigate around them in that 3D space than any kind
Mhm.
of physical combat scenario.
Yeah,
Uh
it isn't until later when there are some missiles and some homing attacks that you do actually have to jump as well as strafe at the same time
yeah.
and try not to run into other things. But there's really only like 4 or 5 encounters that really test you in that way.
Yeah. So I mean, also there's the sort of overworld town exploration stuff, which that might leak
Mhm.
over into the discussion of the story. But I guess how do you feel about that? Because it's a very different change of pace. Because a lot of the dungeon crawling is almost like they have like it's very like dark and cramped, and there's like a lot of very moody music. It's almost kind of scary down in there.
I like the moodier atmosphere, um, of the caves a lot, but when it comes to, like, the RPG elements of running around town and talking to people and just sometimes just figuring out who you have to talk to next or what you're gonna do. Um, it's easy to get sidetracked and be like, "Oh, what does this person do? What's going on here?" Um, it does it in a more natural way, I would say. There was never a point, even now playing this game and replaying it for the 10 millionth time, that I ever like stopped to think, "Oh, I'm bored of this," or like I don't know. I'm still finding out little things that I didn't know about this game, like going in and out. Um, it's it's great. Everyone has personality. The only thing that is a negative, I would say, is I wish everything was voiced, but you can't have that when you have the tiny cartridge, and even on the discs, audio files take up so much space. But
Yeah,
that that would have sold me even more. Like, I was the kinda kid when the voiced lines and the cutscenes came on, I was starry-eyed, and, like, I was like, "Everybody shut up. Shh, 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 shut up, shut up. Mom, don't come in the room. I'm watching. Roll is telling me that they're gonna go in, and I can't let them go in." Like, uh, popping off on it. It's great. And
you were the most invested in the story of Mega Man Legends.
it's true, and, being, like, I don't even know. How old was I? 8, 9? 9 years old playing that game. Everyone in it also the voice acting is really cheesy in some ways,
Yeah,
but it sells so hard for the art style that they went for in this game and just the overall mood. It fits the music really well, and as a kid within that, like, 9 to 12 range, that was exactly what I needed to hear with everything. It all goes together so beautifully. When you dissect it one by one and a little bits by bits, yeah, that falls apart a little bit, but as a whole cohesive unit, it is a vibe, and I love it.
yeah, that's that. I have more questions about a lot of the stuff that you talked about here later.
Mhm.
So one more question about Oh, actually, I have two more questions about the gameplay. One of them is about the boss fights, which we kind of
Yeah.
mentioned. Especially the original X and classic series, they're very very focused around the boss fights. They're basically the main draws. The whole weapon, uh, the system of stealing a boss's weapon, using it against the others. But obviously, this does not do any of that. Uh,
Hmm.
how do you feel about those boss fights, especially in comparison to those older games?
I like that they tried to do a spin on knowing your character's actions and movements and comparing them to a new boss's actions and movements. They don't do it quite as well as a whole. Like some bosses are definitely some stinkers and they're just too easy to overcome um, later on, but there are some that still give me trouble now. Like I actually replayed a couple times, and the first time I went through easy just to see how fast I could do it again. I like to speedrun it from time to time. Um, but there are some bosses that I can't do the usual things on, and they take a little bit more effort, even on easy. Um, you don't take any less damage on the different difficulties. You just take more for hard.
Yeah,
Um, and if you're not wearing the helmet and you're jumping around a lot, like I was talking about, how you have to occasionally jump on some of the later bosses instead of just only circle strafing. If you get hit in the air and you fall down, you're going to lose extra health every time you hit the ground because you're not wearing the helmet. And I'm I'm the person that doesn't wear the helmet because I want to see his wacky Goku hair.
he does kind of have Goku hair. That is true.
Hmm.
Uh, do you have a particularly favorite boss that you enjoy?
Yes. I can't remember which one it is, but there is a section when you're leaving the Closer Woods gate that opens up all the subgates
Mhm.
for another like sort of go to these places and get all the keys kind of objective. But as soon as you leave and you've done that, you if you didn't save there, it is a hell. Like that was one of the things that does irk me in this. The points where you should be able to just save, you always have to talk to Data, the monkey, your beautiful little friend who has all your memories and could do no wrong. Um,
Yes.
but the fact that they didn't have a like an autosave thing or something like that for those kinds of encounters would have been nice, but they weren't on that tech yet. But anyways, there is a boss fight that's a sequence of boss fights where you fight the Bond's pirate ship, their big old green ship in the sky. And as soon as you have beaten that fight and you're on top of the flutter shooting it down, as it's about to go down, they have one last ditch robot, and it is Tron's it, big red flying robot. I can't remember the name of it, but that fight is, I would say, the most difficult fight in the game
I'm,
because
I'm looking
if
this
you
up on
don't,
the wiki. It's called the Fawk Wolf.
yeah, they have a lot of like German leaning type names and things like that. I
Yes.
think for the bonds. Yeah, the Focke-Wulf is just a big ol' bird that shoots homing missiles. It shoots the higher damage machine gun bullets, and it's flying in circles and at quite a distance. So if you don't come in with like a good special weapon with some range, or you haven't bought or set up your buster with any upgrades that increase range or anything like that, you're screwed. Like there is nothing you could do. I've never felt more helpless as a kid playing like an early game like that in any boss fight except for that one. That one was
Yeah.
insane.
It's
Uh, it's rough.
it's a really fun boss. I think my favorite is probably what is it? I'm looking up still on the wiki, just looking up stuff. Uh Theodore Bruno, the big gray boss, where you fight him in this giant arena of the old
Old
city,
city,
essentially.
baby.
Yes, and I think it's I really see it more as I'm gonna again talk about this idea of this being a very historically significant game.
Mhm,
It's a very early moment in 3D game design where they're like, we can have very interesting boss fights in 3D space where, you're trying to dodge in between these buildings and the robot will blow up the buildings and that damage will stay even after you beat the robot and have to explore around the town. I
mhm.
think it's just as a set piece itself, I think it's a really, really interesting fight. just on its own
Exactly.
on that level.
Yeah.
Uh,
The earlier boss fights set up as well that buildings will eventually blow up if they're being shot. Like the
mhm,
first really big encounters with the bonds at first in the town.
yeah.
Um, it, and especially with Bruno, I would say Bruno is my second favorite because
Mhm.
of that as well. Like he destroys those buildings so quick, and you really can't hide from everything for too long. You have to get in, or you'll get smoked.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Uh, so last question about the game before we move on.
mhm,
Uh, this game, obviously, we've sort of made mentions of it. It's a little janky, I would say. How do
mhm.
you think that this style of gameplay with the weird controls and the very square dungeon crawling has aged in general for both yourself and also for people who may be getting into this game for the first time?
It has definitely not aged amazingly. When I'm playing it nowadays, I'm like, man, I wish it played like the kind of smoother tank that the recent like Resident Evil 4 or the
Mhm.
R2 remake and all that kind of stuff. Like that's that's what I expect now out of third person, like sort of chunkier character control.
Yeah.
Um, that kind of movement, but it's not unmanageable. If you do go in with that knowledge of knowing that you can dodge roll to the side, you can do 180 turns, 90-degree turns, and all that kind of stuff, it's not that bad. But if you go in and you just absorb everything as it comes to you, it can be kind of rough. You'll end up relying a lot on that circle strafing, and it'll get like at least early in the game, it'll feel sort of trivial until Bond boss fights. They test you because sometimes they're a little bit faster than you, as opposed to just like standing in one place and letting you just blast their ass running around in circles. Um, yeah, they vary it up in an interesting way. But I think the special thing about Mega Man Legends for me is more so the exploration, not just in terms of characters and all the things that you can do on the top side, but
Yeah.
in the caves as well and connecting them all to one another because they all eventually do as you collect more weapons and things like that that can open everything up. Like
Mhm.
that's amazing. That gives me the same. I think this game is actually the reason why I like the Souls genre as a whole because it doesn't really tell you much. It is here is this thing. If things are a little hard or there's a door you can't get through, turn around, come back later. They'll figure it out.
This is this is the third time that we've talked about the Souls games here on this podcast, and this I think might be the strangest comparison yet. Uh,
Yeah, maybe a little bit. It feels weird to keep the referencing things as Souls like and like
yeah.
everybody else does that, but truly this game does have enough of that like DNA in it for it to not feel too strange. There's
Oh
just enough
yeah.
information coming to you from other characters that you kind of know where to go, but at the same time, you have almost every option open to you pretty early on in the game. Like as soon as you get the city license, yeah, go anywhere. Fuck around. You want to go to the TV station and just do mini games and get money for a while? Yeah. You want to kick cans? Go for it. Like anything's possible.
You want to kick cans?
You want to kick
Uh,
cans?
yeah. It's very interesting that you would. I think it's a really interesting take that you would compare it to the Souls games because well the first we had the Bloodborne episode where
Mhm.
we talked about a Souls game, and then we had the Hellblade episode where that has vaguely Souls like combat.
Mhm.
But I think this is the most interesting comparison because it's not just from a combat standpoint, it's from that wider exploratory point. And I think that's a really insightful comment.
Mhm.
Uh let's move on from the gameplay itself and briefly sort of talk about the art style and the sort of atmosphere that this game tries to cultivate. Uh,
Mhm.
I gotta say, I think this might be one of the best looking games on the original PlayStation.
Yes,
Uh,
for sure.
it it has a tremendously great art style that has really held up. I guess really, what are your opinions on that?
I would agree, and this is one of the stances actually that I would say the N64 is my preference.
Mm,
The textures aren't quite as smooth, and there's some anti-aliasing lines and things like that. But in terms of how they render certain textures and lines and what goes on top of one another, what's supposed to stay behind and not, there are some issues there on
yeah,
the PlayStation. And it's it is immediately apparent when you're playing the game and within the first like 10-15 minutes. I remember I didn't play the PS1 version until several years after, like in maybe college years or something. I didn't even know it was a thing. I only knew that um like vaguely there was another like entry in the series or something like that. I grew up thinking
yeah,
this was the only thing at all
yeah.
forever. And
Because the
it blew my
N64 version
mind.
is the N64 version is just called Mega Man 64 because that was the naming convention. It wasn't
Yeah.
called Mega Man Legends. So I'm sure you were very confused. You're like, there's a second one and a
They
spin-off?
they apparently were gonna call it like a Mega Man Neo or some other wild names.
Yes, I read up about that. It's called Rockman Dash in Japan, and then they were trying to like workshop a name for it in Western markets. And like, what about Mega Man Neo? And like, that's stupid as fuck.
No. Put the 64 at the end. Do it. That's fine.
Do it. Whatever works. Uh, yeah, I would say that the art style of this game, it's not too terribly different from what would. It's a lot lighter and softer than something like a Mega Man X, which I would say is probably one of the darker, quote unquote, darker and edgier Mega Men.
Yeah,
It's the radical extreme Mega. The X stands for extreme. Uh,
exactly.
but it hews more closer to the softer art style of Mega Man Classic, but
Mhm,
just the way that all those models look and they've it almost reads as if they were. It's not like a. I think the best example would be to compare it to something like Metal Gear Solid, which came out around the same time, where
mhm,
that game you can tell that they tried their best to make it look like realistic human models.
mhm.
Uh,
With the texturing that they did too, like,
with the
they went all
texturing,
out.
and it feels like they're constrained by the technology of their time, but with this game it feels like, oh, this is the perfect art style to translate into this technological field.
Mhm.
It's very Saturday morning cartoony, and I think that works really well, and especially when you get it to contrast with the dungeons where it's like fucking Quake levels.
Exactly. I love my big, thick noodle arms with my coffee mug hands and just big anime eyes.
They're great, and like you said, like you mentioned, the voice acting earlier, that's also really, really great. It is again very
Mhm,
Saturday morning cartoony, and that is what sort of is going to allow me to transition to talking about the story,
mhm.
which is not exactly the big standout point. The Mega Man games have never been known for their intense lore, but I guess how do you think that this? What do you think about the story, and how do you think that it stacks up with some of its peers from the era? Because the '90s were, I would say, the late '90s were the period where games started to really embrace storytelling, and
Mhm.
I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
They do it simply enough that it doesn't really keep me thinking about, even now, um, what kind of big twist there's gonna be later. It starts so simple, like, "Hey, the mother lode is a thing." You heard about that in that intro, sequence that you may or may not have watched, right? Cool. If you
Yeah,
watch the other one, you know there are some pirates that are looking for some shit. Neat. But if you didn't watch any of that and you just begin the game as it is, it's you're hanging out, going through caves with your family, and you crash on an island. And but as a kid, you're probably like, "Oh man, I want to go in those caves again. What's up with that? What kind of other robots are there?" And you can immediately do that. You can just before even going into the town, after you like get that situation settled, Spectre comes down like, "Hey, we saw your ship crash. Fucking, let's get you into town and get you a license. You're citizens now." You could totally just detour into a little pod that sort of resembles that thing you saw at the start where you elevated out of this giant tube out of the water that had some caves. You can just screw around as much as you want. The beauty of being able to do that did not make me want more from the story, despite there not really being much to it. The major story beats are really like boiled down to Motherlode exists, crash on island, get off island, problem on island, be like Goku and save everyone.
Yeah,
And that's it.
yeah. It's it is. Like I said, I never expected a whole lot of storytelling from Mega Man.
Mhm.
But at the same time, when I first started doing research for this game and was watching playthroughs and stuff like that, when they first crash landed on the island, I assumed that they would be going like doing multiple different like island hopping things, sort of like vaguely Wind Waker esque, where you'd finish a quest on this island and go to a different one. But no, it's just all on this one nice, very pleasant island.
Yeah, you spend
Or you,
so much time in getting your ship back to the point where you can actually fly it that it kind of makes sense. I kind of was hoping for that too.
Mhm.
At some point, like, oh man, I can't wait to see the other islands.
Oh
But
wow.
by the end of the game, was so in love with it, it didn't even matter to me. I didn't even feel the need to question myself and like maybe there's a sequel until years later, and
Mhm.
that's how much it sold me. I didn't need anything. It was the combination of the art style going so well together, the 90s Saturday morning cartoon esque villains with the bonds and everything else, even the ending bosses and stuff like that. The vibe is so kind of cheesily grandiose that it's perfect. And it transitions very well into the second game, too.
What is it? Whoa! Roll left! Left! Huh? Okay. Hey! Isn't that... They all came to see us off.
Hey, hey! Thank you so much! Thank you! Bye-bye! Take care!
I hope those of you at home are watching. Our brave heroes are taking off, heading for new adventures. As you can see, the people of Catalogs have come out to send them off and wish them well. Hey, everybody! They were all really nice people. Maybe we'll come back here and see them again. Yeah. Okay, setting new course. Here we go!
And I would say that's the appeal of almost all the Mega Man games.
Mhm.
That's the thing that I've because I grew up when I was a kid. I would play all the old classic Mega Man games on the Wii Virtual Console, which an 8-year-old trying to beat Mega Man 2. Uh,
Oh boy.
it's a toughie, but
Yeah.
they all sort of have that very they're all very cutesy in their art style, but they do have a very sincere Saturday morning cartoon style grandiosity to them. You're right.
Yeah.
It's it's the appeal of that goes throughout it. It's a very simple idea. What if there was a blue guy with a gun for an arm that shot robots? And they're like, that's great. Let's just do that. There's a reason there have been multiple actual genuine children's cartoons about this character.
Yeah.
It,
It sells and it for good reason. It's wholesome.
it's
It really
it's
hits you.
yeah, it's a simple, fun action adventure story that works for all ages, and I
Mhm.
think that's a very effective part of what makes this game as well as the rest of the series work. So, it's not exactly gonna win a whole lot of awards. It's not like another game that came out the exact same year that we talked about on this podcast, Final Fantasy VII,
Mhm.
uh, but it is very fun in its own way. Uh,
Indeed. It is the perfect kind of thing to develop a cult following.
exactly.
Mhm.
We kind of maybe already mentioned this, but what do you think is the weakest aspect of the game?
Um, well, if we're talking about as a whole, I would say, mm, the getting around point, because this is a game that you do some backtracking from time to time if you
Mhm.
so choose. Um, and there's a little bit that you kind of have to do, but if you don't want to, you don't really have to go into the dig sites again and start rummaging around for other stuff. You
Yeah.
can just stay mostly on the surface until you hit the bigger dig sites that take a higher grade license to do all that. But going in between them all is quite a chore when you don't have the jet skates that you can eventually get. And
Yeah.
I still, despite how much I've played it, I still don't remember off the top of my head where the part is that you find that lets you make it from roll. And that's and even then, when Roll has the car and they can drive you around to everything, this is actually a perfect time to say this is another thing I like about the 64 version better than the PlayStation. The loading is insanely fast compared to the PlayStation. Like when it has
Yes.
to sit and read a disc for so long for even saving, um, like saving takes about 20, 30 full seconds to open it up, the memory card, save it to a thing, and you only have 5 or 6 slots as opposed to 16 on the cartridge. Um, yeah, it's crazy. And when you're on the N64, that stuff is instantaneous. Um, so I wouldn't say that would be the biggest knock against it because each version has its own difference. But if I had to pick one that goes between everything, it's just the traveling between sites. If you really do want to get into the nitty gritty and experience the game for all that it's worth, it can be kind of a chore to just walk around until you get the walkie talkie and know where you're going and find the jet skates. There is like a weird lull that happens at a certain point in the game with that. But besides that, there really aren't that many knocks specifically to like a whole area like the audio or gameplay or whatever. I like them for what they are, and yeah, I I have no
Yeah.
qualms. I'm just sitting here like, man, I'm gonna blow some more smoke up this game's ass. It's great. Play it right now.
Yeah, it's talking about the loading screens. It's very, very interesting that, for all the faults, for all the compromises they had to make when making the N64 version, the one advantage that cartridges have always had over discs is that loading times are pretty much eliminated.
Mhm.
Uh,
In
that
fact, they
it's
probably would have been faster if they didn't keep the screen effect that happens when you transition into a new area. Um, like above ground, there's a two black bars that close in from the top and bottom. Screen goes black for a second, and then you come back in. Or underground, it's a camera locked walking through these doors animation to load in the next area. But when you count the seconds in between them all, it's a quarter second and then it's up. Like I feel like it could have been done even faster if they changed that transition.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how a lot of the developers of that time have had sort of incorporated the loading screens into the game itself to make them seem less intrusive. And it,
Mhm.
it, it happens again in the N64 version of Resident Evil 2 that we mentioned,
Yeah.
where they had to keep the door screens because those are an integral part of the game and the way that game builds tension.
Mhm.
But they exist only to fill time for the loading screens. So the
Yeah.
N64 just has them as a vestigial thing, like an old vestigial tale. It's yeah, it's really interesting to see how that they sort of tackled trying to make these sorts of 3D games, and we'll talk more about that later.
Mhm.
Uh, what would you say is the strongest aspect of the game?
Uh, the overall 90s aesthetic that it pulls off. The Saturday morning cartoon wacky adventure vibe. It's kind of infectious, and I mean, obviously there are some people that are immune to it, but if you're into just a game for a fun time that has a little suspense and has a little wackiness to it, and you're just down for a good romp, this is like the perfect game. The
Yeah,
start isn't too crazy. The controls are a little wonky, but you can get over it. The characters are interestingly enough. The delivery isn't bad cheesy, it's cartoony cheesy. Um, yeah, like the first hour of play is a really solid package to sell you.
Yeah, and the story is not terribly high stakes. It's not exactly like, "Oh my god, the world's gonna fucking explode." It's like, "Oh, who's gonna get the treasure?" It's
Mm-hmm.
the villains are silly and fun. Obviously, Tron Bonne was so much fun, she got her own game.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's just a nice, very pleasant experience. It's like, it's a very weird game to compare it to, but it's almost as low stakes as something like Animal Crossing. It's
Yeah, actually, you're
it's
right.
very nice, and especially for someone like you, who I assume have played through this game many, many times. It's very calmingly familiar. There's nothing exactly too high stress about it.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Funny enough, another core mechanic that they do eventually tell you, but I just skipped as a kid and didn't see it.
Mhm.
All there are some random holes and stuff in the walls and caves, sometimes even in the city and other places where you can just investigate it with the opening door button and just see what's in the fucking hole. Um, and I didn't know that for so long. And there's some really amazing stuff in that is just locked behind a hole, and if you skipped that tutorial, you just never knew that there were some things to investigate. And that has the perfect Animal Crossing vibe to it, where you're just like, oh, you're going to fish for this thing. What's in the thing? It plays that sound effect. You're like, oh, yes, I got another sea bass. Great. Sometimes it's just Zenny, but sometimes it's a new part. And you're like, oh my God, I got to tell Roll about this and see what it makes. Like, there's there's just enough mystery everywhere in that same vibe of Animal Crossing, so yeah, that's a very good comparison. I I wouldn't say that's too far off.
Yeah, it's a very it's not exactly it's a very light and breezy game. It's very
Yes.
entertaining in that way.
You can come
Uh,
back and pretend like it's a whole new episode for you.
exactly.
Mhm.
Uh, what would you say is your favorite area in the game?
Mm, I think maybe I like the things that they do in one of the main gates that doesn't have a boss in it, oddly enough.
Mhm.
The Okay, so I also like to think of this game in some ways as a horror game. There are some genuinely, like, weirdly creepier, more jarring moments that come up, and
Yeah.
they don't dive into it too much in the game, but when it's there, there is a vibe shift, and it's very impactful. Like, the music in that, for example, it's the gate for it is smashed down by Roll with, the van that you eventually suit up, and that gate doesn't have a boss in it, but inside is just a very eerie, setting where, like, water is coming down everywhere. It's not as wet as the other lake one specifically, but the music for it is very strange, and it also matches the later vibe of that actual no, you know what? I'm changing my answer midway through, I think. I think even better is the lake one after you fight one of the other Bond bosses, this big old lake frog. Um,
Mm.
because there are specifically some enemies that are invisible, and that does not happen in the game. And the only note that you could have that might lead you to believe there could be some invisible enemies is there's an item that you can buy in the town that makes you temporarily invisible to enemies. Um,
Yeah.
and seeing those for the first time, hearing swooshing, teleporting, running around sounds around me, and that game actually had a weirdly okay stereo setup for its audio, even with
Yeah.
my old terrible TV. Like, oh, spooky, very spooky.
Yeah,
But
you're
yeah.
right that especially, because we mentioned the dungeon stuff earlier. There is an almost we've talked about how bright and colorful this game is, but there is also an undercurrent of weirdly ambient, like almost horror stuff. Uh,
They dive into that a lot more in the second game, which I appreciate greatly. But this this game, like, I love it so much because it sets the groundwork for everything that 2 does even better. And despite it being, like, just generally the better game overall, you can't have that game without this game. It is. It touches on everything that is in 2. There aren't really any too many completely new factors. They're just evolutions of what you could see them growing into. They don't have
Yeah.
some really arbitrary new additions that just seem weird. It all just makes sense when you move on to the second game.
We will talk about that game very shortly next.
Mhm.
Do you have a favorite song from the soundtrack?
Oh man. Oh, mamma mia. It's got to be the descent spiral in the main gate.
Mm.
Like it's man, that is the point where everything hits the fan and you're like, "Oh my god, I'm finally going to find out what the secret is to this freaking island."
Oh.
Dun, dun, dun-na-na-na, dun-na, dun, dun-na-na-na. Like, man, it's amazing. Even though what you're fighting in there, getting to that point isn't that tense, it gets my blood pumping enough, even on the N64's kind of butchered sound quality.
It's super compressive.
Is 8,000 bits enough? I don't know. Make it slap anyway.
Sure. I hate to be the very obvious pick guy, but the music that plays in the covered market,
Mm,
I really do enjoy that, and that's mostly from me not having grown up with the game, but having grown up with YouTube, like watching gaming YouTube videos from around the mid 2000s,
mhm.
where people use that music all the time, and like that. And I briefly also mentioned this in my Final Fantasy VII episode, uh, where that sort of music has just been burned into my brain because I've heard so many people use it all the time for like backgrounds for their like epic game reviews or whatever.
Mhm.
It's just become like gaming stock music essentially.
You know,
Uh,
I now that you think that you say that, it really is used in a lot of places,
yeah,
oddly.
people
Wow.
because video game music, it almost never gets hit by copyright bots.
Mhm,
Uh, because it's not normally ever released on like streaming services or for physical purchase. So,
mhm.
it's free. It's good music that you can use consequence free without having to worry about copyright bots. So people just use video game music, and it's just become a common backing track for a lot of stuff.
Mhm. That Apple
Like,
Market. It's a
oh
good one.
yeah, that Apple Market. Now we did briefly mention Mega Man Legends 2 and also the Misadventures of Tron Bonne. So,
Mhm.
do you have any sort of thoughts on those two games?
I still to this day have not actually played myself the Misadventures of Tron Bonne.
Hmm.
Um, but I've watched a couple playthroughs and like for some people it's their favorite out of the 3 and I can see why because Tron was and the Bond gang as a whole is they actually take nowadays center stage more than Mega Man Volnut does himself from those franchises. Um,
Mega Man Walnut will appear, and some people will be like, "Why does Mega Man not have his helmet on?"
yeah, what's with that dude with the Goku hair? What the fuck? Where's Tron Bonne? They're from Legends. Where's Tron? But yeah, no, they're great. And I mean, like I was saying before, Legends 2 really just is it shouldn't have been the ending, but I mean it's for what it's worth, and being currently the last game in the Legends way the games line as a whole,
Mhm.
it does everything so well that you can't really ask for more. Like you can obviously ask for the story to end, but yeah, man, they do it so well. I I had the same feeling after playing Legends 2 that I had with Legends 1, where I was completely satisfied and I didn't need anything else. I wanted Mega Man off the moon, off Elysium, but no, like it also doesn't have to happen. Like it can just be a funny, like, oh, when are we gonna get him off the moon? Like Capcom could literally hold that in their pocket for 50 years and then pull it out when I'm about to go into my grave, and I'll fucking scream. I'll pay the rest of my money to play that game.
I'm imagining you like emaciated in a hospital bed playing Mega Man Legends 3 for the PlayStation 12. Like, I love this game.
Playing it with my mind too. The controller is just blinking and
they got a
stressing my
chip.
muscles.
They got a chip in your brain so you can play this game. Yeah, I mean, we've made like a million different references to this being a Saturday morning cartoon, but the whole idea of there being like, oh, we really need a sequel to this game. It's almost like just getting a new episode of the show, and I think that's a good way to run things. So Mega Man games never have cliffhangers. That's not a thing that they do, really.
Yeah, there's only so many, and we leave that to X. X does those, and they do them swimmingly, and nobody else needs to.
Nobody needs to. The cliffhangers in Mega Man games are usually not exactly very interesting.
A hand coming out of the dirt, or like a message from someone. Like it's very small time stuff.
Yeah, but I think that that sort of concept of it being a new episode of the show, I think really allows it to go down a lot easier, especially when we get into my next question, which is talking about Mega Man Legends 3.
My bones.
So I do remember this drama happening because I was obviously I'm a classic Mega Man fan, so I had a passing knowledge of Legends. So if you don't know, I want to say around. Let me look this up real quick.
So 2011, 2012 ish.
Forgot how to type letters. Yeah,
Shit and
around.
cinnamons.
So around 2010, they basically Keiji Inafune was still a part of Capcom, I believe, at this time. He hadn't left to make Mighty Number 9. That's another story. There was an announcement that they were going to make Mega Man Legends 3 for the 3DS. I think that I might be confusing this. I think there was a Kickstarter. Am I right or not?
Yeah. For Legends.
There wasn't. I don't think. No, no. I don't think there was a Kickstarter for Legends.
For Mighty Number 9, yes.
Okay, I'm getting my memories confused with Mighty Number 9. So in 2010, they announced that they were going to make Mega Man Legends 3 for the 3DS. They had concept art. They were releasing stuff. It was going to be. People were very excited about this because it's the classic thing of they bring back a really old franchise that has a big cult following. People were very excited.
It had been just long enough for everyone to have extra foam in their mouths whenever hearing the name.
It was people. Yeah, people were genuinely really excited for this, and I remember even being someone who was only really interested in the classic games. People were like, "Oh wow, people are really excited about Mega Man Legends 3." And then less than a year later, it got canceled.
Yeah.
I still don't know actually why they canceled it.
Oh, I got the story for you, baby. Don't worry.
Why?
I'm too deep in this to not know.
Give me the scoop.
So this I didn't know until some extra tidbits about it until maybe a couple years ago, like 1 or 2 years ago. This is weirdly fresh. So you know how games nowadays have an early access point. Sometimes they'll have their own forum and stuff like that to listen to player feedback and the people who genuinely want to make a game better. They did do that to an extent with Legends 3.
I do remember something like that.
Yeah, but it was, from what I remember, mostly for the Japanese audience. I think there might have been a version of the website available translated maybe at some point, but regardless, there was a small amount of time where people could post their feedback and do that kind of stuff, yada yada. That had a hand in bringing it down because, as the internet is always a strange, mysterious cesspool of stuff that hits bad when you least expect it, but you can't be surprised. Of course, it did a little bit there. There are people that complained about all the wrong sorts of things, despite there never even really being a demo that was readily available. They were only available at like 1 or 2 conventions during that time, and it was basically nothing. Um, but they were still making this game regardless, until Keiji left. Inafune was gone, and love him or hate him, he was a production powerhouse and could be the spirit behind a game that would give people the drive to finish what they were doing from on their day to day, to move things along, to be able to push things in front of stakeholders and be like, look how good this game is going. We put out a demo, show everybody. Can we do some ads or something? Like he was your guy. And that's why
Yes.
at the time it made sense for that kind of person, even if they're not like as integral in the actual design of everything, just more organizational for Mighty Number 9. Like they're like, okay, this seems like the right guy to go behind it, but they just, that's a whole separate story. For Mega Man Legends 3, he left, and there was no one really left to drive
On the
that
project,
passion
yeah.
still. Yeah. And combined with the internet weirdness, and the dwindling interest because of it, it just and internal issues drawing up from that, it died. I feel like they heard me say, 3DS? Okay. And they were like, oh, well, ungrateful,
Okay, cancel
are
the
we?
game. Cancel the game. Cancel the game.
Canceled. Get fucked.
Yeah, it's one of the great tragedies. It's one of those things that you hear about where it's people are obviously still very invested in getting a Legends 3 made, and it's kind of sad that Capcom. This was in Capcom's sort of fallow period, really, between like I want to say like the mid 2000s and probably like 5 years ago with Resident Evil 7 when they really started to right the ship. Where they were like shipping out games to Western developers, and they like really didn't have very good handle on what their main franchises were. It was kind of very, very sad in a way to have Legends 3 be a part of that mismanagement and be a casualty of that. It is like I said, it's one of the really, really great epic gaming tragedies. But let's get back onto Legends 3. I got 3 more questions for you.
Hit me.
Why do you think that this game... this is kind of a hard question to answer, but why do you think this game has developed such a strong cult following?
When you do enough things right in your systems and your story and everything else, and there isn't really anything truly broken or completely wrong with your game, and if there is something wrong, it's just like one thing, I feel like that is the perfect recipe for a cult following. Because like I was talking about before, I compared it to some things that do seem kind of strange, like Dark Souls, even though there's not really that much melee combat that you can do. It's
Mhm.
mostly ranged, but there's that exploration to it. There's the Metroidvania aspect of like backtracking for items and all that kind of stuff. Um, there is enough spice in all the right places, despite its clunky controls. And if you were playing the 64 version, it's crunchy audio. Um, or if you didn't like the way that they rendered vectors on PS1 or whatever. Despite all of that, it is still coming back to the the words, the vibe. Some people you just eat it up. Sometimes you're introduced to it at the perfect time and you never forget. And that's my relationship with it. It's it's the perfect spice for me and how I grew into things. And I believe games like that are really special. Um, I honestly prefer games that do that sort of stuff right and do some things wrong, because the next thing that whatever that studio is doing, if they're in the same realm, they're gonna kill it. The next one will be slapping, guaranteed.
Yeah, we talked about in an earlier episode with our mutual friend Sir B.
Mhm.
We talked about Fallout New Vegas, and that's another game that I would consider to have a very large cult following.
Oh yeah,
It's probably the
huge.
most. It's probably the most mainstream cult game, I would say, and that people
Mhm.
know what Fallout New Vegas is, But when it first came out, I would say that it's very much a cult game, and that does a lot of stuff really, really well. But the way that game was rushed in development and it came out really buggy, that was, I think you're right in that cult games have a lot of really great stuff, but then one major flaw that makes that drives a lot of people away from it. And in New Vegas's case, that was the bugs.
Mhm.
But I think
But
that
bugs are fixed with time, especially in this online age. So,
exactly,
and that's why now that is the model for most games. It is, oh well, if I mean it's a little broken at the start, we can just fix it in the first month. They'll come back. And you know what? You're kind of right. But that
yeah,
also kind of puts a weird stank on the cult following description that I put, because now that everybody kind of can just do that, can have a couple broken things and just update it later, it feels weird. We're out of that era now, and it's only small teams of like 2 or 3 people just doing what they can and putting out a pretty good chunk of content by themselves. Those are where the true stars of like
yeah,
cult
those
following games will come from.
indies have mostly become where cult following games with cult followings come from.
Mhm.
Uh, that or whatever shrinking mid-budget double A or single A games that still exist. I would argue
Exactly.
that in a lot of cases, like uh, I want to say almost the Metro games are kind of culty, but even
Ooh,
then,
yes.
they still get big marketing pushes and like get Sony ads and things like that.
Mhm.
But the sort of yeah, you're right. The idea of a cult game has mostly been moved on to indie developers as the gaming landscape has mostly just been dichotomized into uh, indie games or giant billion-dollar AAA games. There's no really in between mid-budget games anymore.
Mhm. And
It's
even the
either
games that feel that way still had a lot of budget pumped into in different aspects.
yeah,
Like, if it's really short, it's because they pumped everything into graphics because of their AAA status or something along those lines. Like,
it's
yeah.
yeah, and especially now in the era of you know large publishers and console manufacturers buying up studios, that's going to keep happening.
Mhm.
Where back when the original Stalker came out, that was a really big cult game because it was a weirdly hard Euro janky uh, niche title. But now
Mhm.
Stalker 2, I think GSC Game World is at least partially owned by Microsoft, or they have some kind of deal with Microsoft.
Mhm.
Uh, and that game got fucking announced at E3. Uh, so, if you were playing Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl back when it first came out, you'd never imagine that they would announce that Microsoft would have a big announcement for the sequel on at E3. Those
Mhm.
sorts of games don't really get made by these kinds of mid-budget companies anymore, and it's kind of a lost art now. It's almost a little sad.
Yeah. It's a dying light, but some surprising flickers do come out every so often.
That is true.
Mhm.
Uh, And speaking of sort of this wider historical look at the game industry, would you argue that this is a historically important game?
Yes, because we wouldn't have the knowledge of what kinds of things can go wrong in game development like we did with 3 if we did not have the first game, and we wouldn't have 2 without the first game. We wouldn't
Yeah.
we I don't know where Mega Man would have grown, um, from if Legends as an entry wasn't a thing, because it was there's always classic Mega Man and a couple more X's that would eventually come out and keep doing their thing. But
Uh-huh.
they are even more set in their ways in that 8 bosses, couple extra stages at the end, yada yada, that kind of stuff. It was
Yeah.
only some other like battle networks were the ones that were shaking it up really hard, as well as even though failed, even though I kind of like them, the Mega Man X Command mission for PS2,
Mhm.
um, and all that
It's Star
vibe.
Force, not Star Command. I got that wrong. It's Star Force.
Star Force. You know what? It was fine. It's a little Toy Story reference is okay.
It's it's I mean, I mostly wrote this question in a way that I can talk about this, kind of a selfish way to write an interview question. Uh, but I do think that this is a very historically important game and that it's very emblematic of where 3D games were. It's a weird stepping stone between like Mario 64, which is the first 3D game that really got everything right. And then everybody else tried to be like Mario 64 and then fucked up terribly. And then we get to the late 90s, people are like, okay, we understand 3D now. So it's a stepping stone between Mario 64 and like Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah.
It's that
And
sort
it's
of interesting middle point where people were still trying to figure out how 3D games worked.
exactly. And like the time between Super Mario 64 coming and Legends for PS1 was not long.
It was a
They
year.
Yeah, they rushed in the sense back then you could make games feasibly pretty quickly, much quicker than now, but
Oh yeah.
it was still quite a chore. And if you were a company like probably Capcom was at the time, not saying they definitely were, but if they were trying to put out something every so often to just have IP presence ever available and also trying to stick with the new tech and all that stuff, I think Legends is a happy accident in a sense. Like if it were a game that were going to be made in any other time period where some new technologies and other things were coming around for video games, I don't think it would have done as well as it did. I like if things were a little graphically different, like either higher fidelity, everything else would have felt a little strange. If it was a little bit older, obviously the controls and everything else might have been a little bit more clunky, and it would have really just gotten stink reviews. It's lightning in a bottle that, like everybody says, it is. It doesn't happen all the time, and I'm glad that it did.
Yeah, it's something. It's even for me, for someone who came into this game very not super educated on it. It really is something that's very unique and special, especially in the history of games. I would go so far as to say is valuable and important landmark in the history of video games. Mega Man Legends is. Uh,
Mm-mm.
yeah. So last question.
All right.
How has Mega Man Legends affected you? How has it made you think about games differently?
It's made me more open to and more accepting of faults in other games. Because like we talked about, it's not the perfect game. It does enough right in the right places and all that jazz to sort of form me in my earlier years and like what my tastes are. And I would say comparing it to everything else that I like now, it's not too far off of some of my other favorite things just in general. Um yeah, I don't That's so special to me. It's 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 amazing. Even I'm so glad that as well it also has different versions like for all across even now when it's way harder to find and play than it used to be and it's getting to that sort of deletion gatekeeping kind of way. Everything is expensive or it's just not available anymore, deleted off PlayStation stores, yada yada. It's when you can play it in any way, it is worth it.
Yeah.
Whether you have already shaped your tastes or not, um, like I have, it. I think I would still like this game, even if it wasn't in the formative years for me for video games. It's
Yeah.
it's the special sauce.
It's it's a hard game to find, I would say. There's like a 2001 PC release that probably won't work on a lot of people's systems. You have to probably do some weird fan patching to play it. There's obviously the PlayStation version, the N64 version. I think it's on PlayStation Network on like the Vita or the PS3 that you have to download.
Mm.
Uh,
I'm actually banking, I'm hoping, I'm praying this new PlayStation Plus subscription thing that they have been talking about doing, where one of the things will give you some access to some classic games. Oh my God, I am praying to whatever there is out there that they put Legends and Legends 2 and even Misadventures of Tron Bonne on there. They have done it already once before, and I don't think it would be that hard to do it, even if it's clunky or like doesn't work at first. Right? And
and
if that happens, I'm gonna be I will be everywhere saying, play these games, please. Let's get another Mega Man Legends 3 train going.
And they did not too long ago, I would say earlier this decade. Well, not this decade. In 2016, I keep thinking it's the 2010s still. But they came up with the Mega Man Legacy collections, which were really, really well done. I have not played the Mega Man X Legacy collections. I heard those are not as good. But at least the collection of the original, the classic Mega Man series, those were really, really well done. And maybe someday Capcom will, get some sense into them and put together a legacy collection for the Legends games. And I think that would be a really good way to sort of preserve those for future generations. Or, you can just emulate them. Always an option.
Always an option. Please do it.
It's never morally wrong. Don't worry about it, kids. Piracy is
capitalism.
Cool and good.
Ugh, get it out of here. Be a pirate. Be like Luffy.
Piracy, be like Luffy or be like Tron Bon. Piracy is cool and good. And that's our episode, people. That's it.
Hey, wait, can I share with you something a little special that I did on the side?
Oh yeah, sure.
So, for a little while, I was a QA tester for almost 5 years.
Yes.
And one of the things that helped to get me this job, or that job in the past, was a bug that is only in the Mega Man 64 version, as far as I'm aware. And I have not seen anyone post about it ever. And while I was playing through for this, I finally got a snippet of it.
Was that what was I did could you subscribe to my YouTube channel? I did check your YouTube channel and I saw that you had posted that. And I didn't realize it was 15 hours ago that happened.
Yeah, I was late in the night. I just had to.
Incredible. But yeah, that's our show. Tyler, thank you so much for coming on and being part of this program.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
No problem. It's been a delight to talk to you about this game that you love so much. Do you have anything you want to shout out or plug before we wrap things up?
No. I mean, I'm screaming into microphones for fun on my own time.
Hire this man.
Hire me, please.
Nintendo, hire this man.
Nintendo, I'm right here. I'm ready to scream for you.
Have this guy be Mega Man. Doesn't matter.
Yo, hey, sorry, side note, Mega Man Legends 2. I'm sorry. Should have got somebody else for Mega Man. You can't go higher for a teenage boy a year later than lower. It's strange. It's not bad. They do great, but it's a strange vibe. But yeah, no, I mean, Twitter is the best place, if anywhere, for whatever I'm doing. If you're interested,
at TaiCheesy, the link will be in the description. I always put people's Twitters in the description.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on here. Next week, we're going to have good friend Callie Cream Puff on the program to talk about Ratchet and Clank for the PlayStation 2. We're really getting through to more games I haven't played yet that I need to do research on. Though thankfully, when we get to the Dead Rising episode, I already have played that game, so I will know a lot of things about that. But anyway, next week, Callie Cream Puff, Ratchet and Clank. It's going to be exciting. We're going to talk about aliens and guns and robots. It's going to be a great time. So yeah, I'll see you then. Stay responsible. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This is a Shutterball production.